Hi readers, Chris here. Today I'm going to be doing a full-length review on The City of Brass by S.A. Chakraborty. I finished this book last week. I talked about it a bit in my reading wrap-up, but because it was recommended to me by one of you, I wanted to do a full-length review and give this book the attention that it deserves. Like most of my reviews, my full-length ones, I'm going to be talking about world building, characters, and plot. No spoilers, but I am going to talk a little bit about spoilers at the very end of the video. I will notify you before that section in case you want to click out. But just to give a quick setup, City of Brass was recommended to me by @reading_a_book over on Instagram. The setup of this book is we have a young girl, her name is Nari. She is living in the streets of Cairo. She's a thief, and she kind of has these mysterious powers that she doesn't really know why. No one else really knows about them, but she can kind of heal people mysteriously. And one night during a routine healing, she accidentally calls on the spirit of a jinn warrior. If you're not familiar with that term, it's basically a genie. This genie shows up that she accidentally summoned, and all of a sudden they get attacked by this group of demons called Ifrits. Ifrits. They're basically these fire demons, and they have to run. And he says to her, like, you're special. We need to take you to this city, the City of Brass, so that you can be protected. Now, that's kind of one half of the story. The other half of the story is that there is a young boy named Ali, and he is actually a genie, a jinn, growing up in the City of Brass. He is the son of the king, so he's a prince, but he's not like, he's the second son. So his older brother is like in line for the throne. He's the second son. There is like a whole, that's like a basic setup. So when it comes to the world building of this world, like Nari's story is very simple. She flees Cairo. She's with this genie. They're kind of on the run from these people that are this group that's after her. She doesn't really know why. And then once they get to the City of Brass, that's when things really start to take off. So now we have Ali, who's living in the City of the Brass. And within the City of Brass, I don't know why I keep saying City of the Brass, but within the City of Brass, Ali, there is like all these different groups of jinn, all these different groups of genies. There's different tribes, and they all have different like political systems, slightly different religions, different languages. The political setup, the government setup of the genies in the City of Brass is extremely complex. And at times, I found that super interesting on one hand, but also a little bit confusing at times on other hand. Because I'm not familiar with a lot of Egyptian terms, they had terms for some of these groups that I didn't understand. Now, to be fair, there is a glossary in the back of this book, but even though some books have glossaries, I like to try to figure it out myself. So it took a while, at least halfway, if not 3/4 of the way through this book, to like really understand what some of the different terms meant. Now, I enjoyed this book, so that's really like a minor complaint, but it's just something to be aware of. Now, so again, going back to, there's all these different tribes of genies. They all live in this city, and the relationship between them is very tenuous because they have different beliefs. There's a lot of history here. If you think of like big epic fantasies like Game of Thrones, Lord of the Rings, that have these really long timelines, thousands of years of history, that's kind of what's in this book. Because the group that's in charge, like Ali and his family, they have a long history with a bunch of the other jinn tribes, and not all of it is good. Hopefully I'm explaining that correctly. There's a lot of politics and politicking between the different groups, and when Nari gets involved, that just brings everything to a whole new level. There's like radical groups, there's radical religions, there's, different types of magics. It is a very intricate and complex system. And again, part of me super, super likes that because it is extremely different. But on the other hand, it was a bit hard at times to kind of keep track of who is fighting with who doesn't like who has a history with who, and those type of things. So that's the world building and setup of this book. Very deep, very complex. So now I'm going to talk about some of the characters. And obviously we have 2 main characters, but then there are a ton of sub-characters. So again, going back to Nari, she is 50% of this book, if not more. She is basically the main character of this book for all intents and purposes, even though her chapters are split up with, Ali's point of view. But she's the main character. And when it comes to her basic storyline is she summons the Jinn warrior. They have to run away to this city, and then what happens to her when she gets there is her trying to find her place, who she's supposed to be, what she's supposed to do. Because everyone thinks that she's one thing, everyone wants her to be one thing, but that's not necessarily what she wants. She's developing a relationship with Ali, not necessarily romantic, but a friendship / potential romance. But then she also has this warrior that she summoned, and his name, Dara. He has a whole big history behind him. That's like I can make a whole video just about that. But she has a relationship with him. He's been with her since the beginning of the story, and he has a very, very tenuous relationship with the people that live in the city of Brass. But on a very base level, Nari is a thief. She's been alone most of her life. She doesn't know who her parents are, etc., etc. And some of that stuff is very stereotypical to fantasy stories. Like, she's alone, but she's special. That's kind of all stuff that we've heard before in fantasy tales. Even thinking to let's see, Red Queen, we had Mare, she's special, no one knows why. Even, Katniss Everdeen, she's special. You know what I mean. If you've read any YA fantasy, you know the trope of someone who's special. But for her, it's a little bit different because of where she ends up, which I can't super talk about without talking a lot of spoilers. But the one thing that I will say is that all of the stuff that happens in the first couple chapters, when she's living on the streets of Cairo, I think the book does a really good job of taking that and applying it through the rest of her story. So many times we see a character that starts in one place, ends up in a different place, and never goes back to where they were before. An example would be Shadow and Bone. We have Alina. She was an orphan. She didn't know where she grew up. She spent her whole childhood as an orphan alone. And throughout the Shadow and Bone series, there's really nothing about that calls back to her being an orphan. But in this book, it's a little bit different, and I appreciate that. And then on the other side of the coin, we have Ali, again, living in the city of Brass. He's a second son, and that comes with its own layer of, he has very specific responsibilities he has to his family, to his city, and then to Nari when she shows up. He has to balance so many different things, so many shifting alliances, shifting politics, shifting everything, that it's quite amazing. And I actually think that out of the two, that Ali might actually be the more interesting character, because he, again, starts out very stringent in his religious beliefs and like what he believes, and those beliefs are challenged throughout the course of the book, and he really has to decide, you know, what's more important, his love for his family, his love for his tribe, his love for his, you know, culture and history. It's all very, very fascinating, and I think that Ali, more so than any other male character I've seen in a fantasy series like this, is super fascinating. I'm calling it a YA series, even though technically this book was in the adult section at Barnes & Noble. And I've said this a million times before, but I don't really understand why this book was considered adult. To me, it is very much a YA fantasy. And normally you don't have that male-female like back and forth in a lot of YA fantasies that I've read. So I thought that was super, super interesting. As far as the plot goes, again, this plot is like pretty much non-stop action. And the very first chapter is when Nari summons her genie, and then they immediately take off on the run. So there's no like ramping up. It gets you into the action right away, and it never stops the entire time. From page 1 to page end, whatever page is at the end, it is action, 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 action. Action never stops. It just keeps going. And I really can't talk a lot about the plot without giving much away, other than I will say that the flow is, it's because of all the action, it is really like structured in a way that makes you want to keep reading. Once you start this book, if you're into it, you'll know if you're into it within the first chapter. You're not going to want to put it down because it just keeps going and going and going. And it's super, super, super fast paced considering how big of a book it is. Super fascinating. Those are my non-spoiler thoughts on The City of Brass. So if you have not read this book and you don't want to know anything more, now is your time to click off the video and come back later someday when you have read this book. So I'm going to count down, give you a second to leave. 3, 2, 1. I'm going to talk about some spoilers now. And oh boy, are there a lot of spoilers in this book. I'm not going to talk about all of them. I'm just going to talk about the ones that I found most interesting. And the first is going to be the relationship between Ali's brother, whose name I'm sure I'm not pronouncing right, but Mutadir, we'll call him Mutadir. Mutadir and his relationship with Jamsid, his royal guard. I thought it was so interesting how their relationship progressed over the book. Because when we first meet Jamsid, we don't really know that much about him. But as the story goes on and we start to learn more about him, and I still don't think that we know everything about him, there is a romantic relationship hinted at between the two. Between Mr. Crown Prince there and the captain of his guard. Which they haven't really come out and explicitly said it, but I feel like that's a no-no or forbidden in this society. There's been no other examples throughout the book that I've seen of any sort of like LGBT romance, so it's very fascinating that he has this romance with Jamsid, which again, they never explicitly state. It's not like clear, but it is, they basically hit you over the head with it. So I'm pretty sure that that's where things are going. But obviously there is something else going on with Jamsid that we don't know about, because when he gets injured, almost killed at the end of the book, his father does something to him, something magical. We don't know what it is. It's implied that Jamsid may not be who he says he is, which I think is super fascinating. So that brings me to Jamsid's father, the Grand Wazir. And whenever he was in the book, I always thought of Jafar from, like, you know, Aladdin, because he is the only other Grand Wazir I've ever seen on screen. But I thought he was a super interesting character, and I'm not quite sure what his what's his goal? What's his end game? Is it he wants Nari to take power from the family? Like, does he want... It seems like Manazah Nari's alleged mother is alive, and it seems like the Grand Vizier helped her stay alive and helped her fake her death. If that's true, then I still don't understand exactly how Nari ended up alone in Cairo, if that's the case. So Manazah was supposedly attacked by bandits and killed, but it's suggested in this book that she's actually alive and that she is Nari's birth mother. If that's the case, who the hell is her father? Who the heck is her father? And how did she end up alone as an orphan in Cairo? If the Grand Vizier like somehow smuggled her out, I don't understand the purpose of that. Like if he hid Manazah, why couldn't he hide Nari? Those are the questions I have. Hopefully that gets answered in a later book. And then of course that brings me to Dara. Dara is seemingly killed at the end of the book. I, for one, do not believe that is the end of him, because we know that his ring, his slave vessel, his slave ring is hidden like underneath the palace. We know that's there. So I'm assuming he's going to come back at some point in a later book. And again, he claims that he does not remember his time enslaved by the Ifrit. So there's something going on there. There's something there that we don't know. So those are kind of like the big main spoilers I wanted to talk about. Jamsid, Manazah, and I guess Ali. We don't really know what's going to happen with him, but I thought that it was really cool that, Ali kind of has this other side to him because his mother was part of that water tribe, and I really liked how the story brought that around at the end. Like we saw how he liked to swim and people made fun of him, but when he got knocked in the cursed lake, he was able to survive because I think they recognized somewhere within him that kind of water spirit or water energy, and that was able to save him. So I thought that was a really cool callback to his history. So obviously things are very tense at the end of this book. I, for one, can't wait to see what happens in book 2. If you've read this series and you know what happens, you can tell me. I don't mind spoilers, but if you're going to leave any spoiler comments down below, please mark them as spoiler, just for the sake of other readers out there. So those are my thoughts, spoiler, non-spoiler, on the City of Brass. If you've read this, let me know what you think. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you're not already, please subscribe to my channel, and I will talk to you later. Happy reading!